where do we even begin this topic about hookup culture? Because in that dopamine section, we spoke about how if you're using an activity for dopamine, what's eventually going to happen is that your brain is going to produce many more receptors. And then you're going to need more of it to feel that same kind of rush. Now, in terms of cigarettes, that means you might need 2 or 3 cigarettes to feel a buzz, in the same way that you needed only one when you began smoking. But when it comes to sex, I would assume that as every year passes, you might need a higher body count for that year for sex to bring you the same dopamine rush that it once brought you. And I've spoken to a lot of my male friends about this. There's a lot of guys my age who almost regret growing their body count. It's something you don't realize in your 20s. And once you hit your 30s, you almost like feel bad about it. It's a very common conversation. And we're all trying to move past it.
Yeah. And because you know the cost that you paid for that, right? You start feeling the impact on how you deal with relationships. Because that's addicting. It's almost like that quick burst of dopamine when you're looking at short content. The hookup is the equivalent of that short form content, right? So now when you have to invest in something that requires a lot of work, you have a harder time doing that because you're not getting those quick hits of dopamine to keep you going. So I often find that when we indulge too much in the hookup culture, people have a harder time nurturing long-term relationships because you're constantly seeking that validation, that hit. And in long-term relationships, that doesn't happen. It's ups and downs, right? It's a lot more compromise. It's more real life. So that adjustment can be really tough. So that's the price we ultimately pay for it.
I think that this same aspect of chasing dopamine through sex is what manifests itself in the form of polyamory. Do you have a different thought?
I think we are going to try to satisfy some need, some addiction, one way or the other, right? So if it's based on sex, then it's going to be hookup culture. If not that, then it's going to be looking at a lot of porn. Like whatever kind of fills your cup. It might transit into an eating disorder, eating addiction. Then you might use food as a way to get the same hit. So we become desperate to get that same hit, and we'll look for other ways to do it. So often one addiction leads to another one because of that reason. It's a very dangerous path to walk on because before you know, you're adding all of these things, and then by the time you recognize it, you might be so far gone.
I wonder what hookup culture in the long term versus a monogamous, loyal relationship in the long term does, sexually speaking. So if you're having sex with only one person for the rest of your life versus if you're having sex with multiple partners, and it could even be 2 or 3 a year.
Yeah.
In the long term, I wonder what impact that has on one's health. Or is that also subjective?
I think it is subjective. Something you have to be mindful about. It's something you have to look inward and ask the question, how is this making me feel? How is this affecting me? Positively, negatively? For some people, hooking up 2-3 times a year is a sign of independence, that I get to choose my partner. I'm learning about my sexuality by experimenting. Very different conversation versus, I don't feel good about myself. I'm using this as a way to feel good about myself or feel loved or feel that intimacy that I'm otherwise not getting. So asking these harder questions is really important to understand the role sexuality is playing in your health and well-being.
Have you had to ever tell a patient, hey, stop hooking up?
Yes.
So what do you gauge as a doctor on the patient that makes you tell them to stop hooking?
Because I can gauge the impact of sex, whether it's negative or positive, by looking at their physical, emotional health, right? Because often to chase down that hookup, someone's giving up something. I can see how their other relationships in life are suffering. Their professional life might be suffering. So it comes at a cost, physical, professional, interpersonal relationships. So when it crosses that boundary, we know it's a problem. And also just for safety reasons too, we have to think about it. The more desperate you get in the hookup culture, the more laxity you're able to absorb, right? So you're exposing yourself to different infections, high-risk behavior. So there's a lot of things to look for when you're talking about this particular topic because it can have many long-term impact on your physical health. And most people in the heat of the moment are not thinking about that.
Hmm. So for someone who's into hookup culture, which is a lot of young people,
Yeah.
even in India,
Mm-hmm.
it's become a thing all over the country
Mm.
thanks to dating apps. I think people have reached that point where a lot of them want to stop hooking up.
Mm.
Would you say that the protocol is the same? That replace this one activity with other formats of dopamine release for your brain, right?
Exactly. And ask yourself question, why am I seeking this out in the first place? What am I trying to sort of make up for? What is this doing for me that other things can't? So when you ask that question, you recognize, okay, I'm lacking intimacy, I'm lacking meaningful relationships, and that's why I'm using this as a replacement. So let me invest more in that. This is where therapy can be very, very helpful. If you can't figure this out on your own, a professional can help you guide down that path. So if you need help in this area, I really ask people to get it earlier on to help you develop a healthier relationship with sex, because I've also seen the opposite. People overdo it and then they have a much harder time developing that connection with someone, or even affects their sexual performance down the road.
Yeah, this is what came up in a conversation with a sexologist recently.
Yeah.
He said that they figured through their work that an excess of masturbation or sex
Yeah.
eventually leads to some kind of either ED or premature ejaculation r- kind of problems later on.
Mhm.
It's like this is the internet's favorite topic because it always gets views.
Yeah.
I think people know the guidelines when it comes to sex, but I remember reading this in a spiritual book
Mm.
some time ago. It said that the two most difficult impulses to control are your mouth and your lowest chakra,
Yes.
because that's just how you're hardwired.
Mhm.
You're hardwired to want something that tastes amazing,
Yeah.
and you're hardwired to want sex.
Yes.
So, all in all, I think there is power in saying no to yourself occasionally.
Yes.
Probably that's the bottom line of this whole episode in so many ways.